Welcome back, everyone. Today's explainer is going to completely change how you look at the economy. We're not just staring at dry numbers today. No, we're going to track the actual journey of a single dollar and see exactly how it acts as the raw fuel for this massive, dynamic engine that powers our entire global financial system. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's kick things off by challenging a pretty common assumption. We usually think of money as just this static thing, right? Like gold bars sitting safely in a bank vault somewhere. But that is absolutely not how the system works. Money isn't just a medium of exchange. It's actually a product. It's a product with a very real price tag, and it's bought and sold every single day, just like cars or laptops or your morning coffee. So we're going to follow the micro journey of your personal savings account straight into the macro world of global finance. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The market for money. 2. Supplying and demanding funds. 3. Finding the right rate. 4. How banks create money. And finally, 5. Central banks in control.
Part 1. The market for money.
Let's start by looking at the invisible marketplace, where this massive exchange of funds happens literally every second of the day. Economists call this the loanable funds market. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's where the folks who have extra money, the savers, provide funds to the people who desperately need money, the borrowers. So the really crucial takeaways here is that whenever you put a portion of your paycheck into a savings account, or on the flip side, whenever you swipe a credit card to buy something you don't actually have the cash for yet, you are actively participating in the loanable funds market. And the price of making that exchange? Well, that's the interest rate. Let's break down the two sides of this marketplace. On one side, we've got the suppliers. This is you, putting money away for retirement or a business holding onto some of its profits in a financial institution. You're literally feeding the financial system with your savings. Then, on the other side, we have the demanders. These are the entities pulling from that big pool of savings. It could be a business borrowing capital to build a massive new research facility, consumers taking out a mortgage for a new house, or even entire governments borrowing billions to fund their budget deficits. Section 2. Supplying and demanding funds. So let's see what happens when these two incredibly active groups collide. This data brilliantly illustrates the law of demand using real credit card borrowing numbers. Just look at what happens when the price of money changes. As the interest rate shoots all the way up to 21%, consumers naturally want to borrow way less, only $480 billion. I mean, it's just too expensive. But at that super high rate, banks and credit card companies are eager to supply much more money, $750 billion, because the return on their investment is huge. It's this constant ongoing tug of war. But here's the thing, it's not just the interest rate that shakes things up. Outside factors can completely alter the total supply of available money. For example, imagine a scenario where foreign investors think a country's economy is super safe and profitable, like European investors buying US financial assets. That creates a massive inflow of foreign capital. Or think about what happens if a whole generation suddenly decides to save way more of their income for retirement. Or if a government actually runs a budget surplus, meaning they collect more in taxes than they spent, which adds to the nation's overall savings. Any of these events physically pushes the entire supply curve to the right, basically flooding the market with available funds, regardless of what the current interest rate is. And the exact same logic applies to the demand side, when consumers feel highly confident about their jobs and decide to borrow for big-ticket items, like taking out a family mortgage, or when businesses feel confident about future profits and borrow heavily to expand their operations, or when a government spends more than it collects in taxes and needs to borrow billions to fund that deficit. When those things happen, that entire demand curve shifts to the right. The overall thirst for capital just grows. Section 3. Finding the right rate. Okay, so with all these massive forces of supply and demand constantly shifting around, how on earth does the market actually settle on a single price? We'll take a look at the exact equilibrium point right here, where the market finds perfect harmony. This is the spot where the quantity of funds demanded perfectly equals the quantity supplied. In our credit card example, that magic number is an interest rate of 15%, which perfectly equals $600 billion. If the rate creeps up to 21%, we get a surplus of funds, right? So lenders have to lower their rates down to attract borrowers, and the quantity of loans actually made increases. But if it drops down to 13%, we get a shortage of available funds, and eager borrowers bid that rate right back up. Now, it's absolutely crucial to keep this distinction in mind. A simple change in the interest rate, that just causes a movement along the existing curves we just looked at. But an outside factor, like a new government deficit or a sudden change in consumer confidence, that shifts the entire curve. And when the whole curve shifts, the market has to go out and find a brand new equilibrium interest rate to settle at. Section 4. How banks create money. All right, now we are reaching the absolute climax of our journey today. We're going to look at what actually happens inside the banking engine itself, and honestly, it's pretty mind-blowing. What if I told you that banks don't just act as highly secure storage units for your cash, they are just sitting on your deposits? They actually use the money you deposit to physically create, to magically conjure brand new money into existence throughout the economy. It all comes down to a simple equation called the money multiplier formula. It's just 1 divided by the reserve ratio. And the reserve ratio is just the legal percentage of deposits a bank must keep on hand in the vault. So, if that requirement is 10% or 0.10, the multiplier is 10. That means a single $10 million deposit can generate up to $100 million in total money circulating in the economy. Crazy, right? Let's break down exactly how this magic trick works through the step-by-step cycle of fractional reserve banking. Say a person deposits their paycheck into Bank A. Bank A is legally required to keep that 10% in the vault, but they immediately take the other 90% and loan it out to a local business. That business takes the loan, goes out and buys some new equipment. The person who sold them that equipment takes that cash and deposits it into Bank B. Now, Bank B keeps 10% of that new deposit and loans the rest out again. The cycle just keeps repeating. By holding back just a fraction of deposits and loaning out the rest, the banking system acts as the ultimate multiplier of wealth. Section 5. Central banks in control. So, with all this money constantly multiplying and shifting across thousands of banks, somebody has to act as the master mechanic, right? Someone has to keep the whole engine from overheating or totally stalling out. Enter the central bank. They use 3 really specific tools to adjust the dials on the money supply. First, they can use open market operations. This is when they physically buy or sell government bonds. To increase the money supply and maybe help end a recession, they buy bonds from banks, which gives the banks fresh cash to loan out, which in turn lowers interest rates. Second, there's interest rate policy, specifically the discount rate. That's the rate the central bank charges commercial banks for short-term loans. Lowering it encourages banks to borrow and lend more. And third, they can change the reserve requirement we literally just talked about. Lowering it from 10% to, say, 5% means banks have even more money available to lend out, expanding the money supply. The specific interest rate targeted in these open market operations is usually the federal funds rate. So the key takeaway here is that by simply buying or selling government bonds, the central bank alters the amount of cash reserves sitting in banks. That pushes the core overnight lending rate between banks up or down. And since our financial system is entirely interconnected, that seemingly distant abstract overnight rate ends up cascading all the way down to the interest rate you pay on your personal credit cards, your auto loans, and your home mortgages. It is all deeply connected. We've seen how remarkably powerful this system of saving, borrowing, and mathematically multiplying money really is. It literally fuels immense global growth. But it leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on. This entire engine, this whole system, completely relies on trust and confidence. So what happens to the money supply and the economy at large when that leverage cycle suddenly turns? Confidence completely disappears, and this massive interconnected credit engine just freezes up? It is definitely something to think about the next time you swipe your card. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.